He made America laugh with every gravelly line and lopsided grin. As Festus Haggen on Gunsmoke, Ken Curtis was the scrappy, sharp-witted cowboy who stole the show, and hearts, week after week. But when the cameras stopped rolling, the laughter faded, and the man behind the drawl was left alone with a struggle he never spoke of. Behind the scenes, Ken carried a silent burden and a personal battle so deep it would shadow him until his final breath. What really happened when the lights went out and the set emptied? Why did a man who brought joy to millions vanish so quietly and so heartbreakingly? The truth about Ken Curtis and his beloved wife, Tori, isn't just sad, it's devastating, and no one saw it coming. From jailhouse roots to Western fame. Ken Curtis was born as Curtis Wayne Gates on July 2, 1916, in the small town of Lamar, Colorado. Life didn't start with red carpets or camera lights for him. In fact, it was about as far from Hollywood as a person could get. His childhood was shaped by modest means and a unique home environment that many would consider unusual. Ken actually grew up in a jailhouse, and his father, Dan Gates, served as the sheriff of Bent County. His job came with some unexpected housing perks that allowed the family to live in a small apartment directly above the county jail. So while most kids his age were running around on front lawns, Ken's childhood playground included iron bars, cold cells, and the echo of prisoners' footsteps. His mother, Nellie Sneed Gates, played her part too, not just as a homemaker, but as the jail cook. She often prepared meals for inmates, and young Ken grew up watching her serve food to men behind bars. It was a different kind of upbringing, and it exposed him to a side of life most people didn't see. From a young age, Ken showed signs of artistic ability, especially in music. But that path wasn't immediately encouraged. Like many families during the Great Depression, his parents believed in stability and practical careers. So Ken enrolled at Colorado College with plans to become a doctor. But as time went on, he realized that medicine wasn't where his heart was. Music kept pulling at him. After 2 years, he made the bold decision to drop out of medical school and chase what truly inspired him: singing. At the time, this was a high-risk move. America was still recovering from the Depression, and World War II was looming. However, Ken's gamble soon began to pay off. In the early 1940s, he got his first major break when he was invited to join Tommy Dorsey's band as a vocalist. This was no small opportunity. Dorsey was a legendary band leader, and his orchestra was one of the most prominent in the country. Ken joined shortly after Frank Sinatra had left the group, and while stepping into Sinatra's shoes was no easy feat, Ken held his own with a smooth voice and stage presence that audiences quickly warmed to. It was during this time that he made a change that would follow him for life. On the advice of Dorsey, he changed his name from Curtis Wayne Gates to Ken Curtis. It sounded stronger, cleaner, and more marketable in show business. The name stuck, and it was under that name that Ken's career truly began to blossom. After some time on the big band circuit, Ken found an even better fit for his talents in Western music. He became the lead singer of the Sons of the Pioneers, a popular Western group that had a strong fan base and a series of radio and recording hits. With them, Ken helped popularize timeless classics like Room Full of Roses and Ghost Riders in the Sky. His voice, warm and sincere, became one of the defining sounds of the Western music era. Many fans don't know this, but in the late 1940s, Ken Curtis hosted the syndicated 15-minute radio program Chuck Wagon Jamboree, produced by Teleways and recorded in Los Angeles. Airing around 131 episodes over roughly 2 years, it featured Curtis singing Western ballads, engaging in playful banter with a group known as the Novelty Aces, and closing each show with a hymn, a format that blended music and storytelling reflective of his later screen persona. But Ken wasn't content with just singing, and eventually, his charm and onstage charisma opened the door to a career in film. and by the late 1940s and early 50s, he had made the transition into acting, specifically Western-themed musicals and cowboy movies. He appeared in several films that blended music and frontier storytelling, a natural fit for someone with both vocal talent and a deep love for cowboy culture. His association with some of the biggest names in Hollywood westerns soon followed. Ken became a regular in John Ford films, often appearing alongside John Wayne. These weren't minor parts either. He had meaningful roles in multiple classics, and he built a strong screen presence that stood out, even in scenes dominated by stars like Wayne and Maureen O'Hara. While Ken's resume by this point was already impressive, he also explored the B-movie and cult film space, appearing in low-budget westerns and adventure flicks that have since gained a niche fan base. Ken wasn't afraid to experiment with different genres and budgets. He didn't always chase the biggest or most glamorous roles. Instead, he looked for characters that had some grit or heart. But all of that still pales in comparison to the role that would define Ken Curtis in the eyes of millions, Festus Haggen. In 1964, Ken joined the cast of Gunsmoke, one of the most successful and longest-running shows in television history. At the time, the show was undergoing a major shift. Dennis Weaver, who played Chester Good, had left the series. The producers needed a strong replacement who could bring something fresh but not alienate fans, and Ken was the answer. His character, Festus, was originally introduced as a one-off, but the audiences immediately responded to him. With his scratchy voice, down-home drawl, and offbeat humor, Festus was unlike anyone else on the show. He was tough but had a sense of humor, loyal but not overly sentimental. Over time, Festus became the heart of the show, and Ken remained in that role for the next 11 years, appearing in more than 300 episodes. Off-screen, he had a deep respect for the legacy of the show. He never phoned in a performance. Even when scripts became repetitive or production schedules were tight, Ken brought something genuine to every scene. And while many actors grow tired of being known for a single character, Ken embraced it. He often said that he was proud to be part of something that meant so much to people, especially during a time when television was becoming the emotional glue for American families. But behind the camera and beyond the spotlight was a man who, despite all his success, carried heartbreak, made difficult choices, and eventually faced personal tragedy that fans rarely got to see. And at the center of it all was his wife, who shaped and stood by him in ways that few people ever knew. A love that lasted. Ken Curtis may have spent much of his career portraying lovable cowboys and loyal sidekicks, but when it came to his real-life relationships, the path wasn't always so simple. Behind the scenes, his personal life was marked by a mix of early heartbreaks, industry pressures, and eventually, a love that brought him lasting peace. Before he found Tori, the woman who would stand by him until the very end, Ken walked through 2 marriages that both ended in quiet disappointment. His first marriage was to actress Lorraine Page in 1943. At the time, Ken was still early in his music career and just starting to dip into Hollywood. Lorraine had some minor acting credits and moved in similar entertainment circles. They married young and, like many couples of that era, were likely swept up in wartime uncertainty and the fast-paced world of show business. But it didn't last long. Not much is publicly documented about their relationship, but what's known is that the marriage ended quietly and without children. Industry insiders suggest that both were focused on their own budding careers and simply grew apart. However, Ken's second marriage drew more attention, largely because of who he married. In 1952, he tied the knot with Barbara Ford, the daughter of legendary film director John Ford. By then, Ken had already started working with Ford and John Wayne on a string of successful Western films. His connection to the Ford family only deepened with the marriage, but being part of a Hollywood dynasty isn't always easy. Barbara had grown up in the shadow of a strong and famously difficult father. And Ken, though well-liked and respected, wasn't someone who craved the spotlight or thrived in the social power games of Hollywood. The couple stayed married for over 12 years, but the strain eventually took its toll. By the early 1960s, Ken's commitment to his role on Gunsmoke and Barbara's own lifestyle and ambitions began pulling them in different directions. They divorced in 1964. Again, the split was relatively quiet, and there were no public accusations or press feuds. Ken didn't speak ill of her, and there was a quiet dignity to how he handled the separation, much like everything else in his life. But just 2 years later, in 1966, Ken's life changed, and this time, it stuck. That's when he met and married Tori Connolly, the woman who would remain by his side for the rest of his life. Tori wasn't an actress or part of the Hollywood scene. She didn't come from fame, nor did she seek it. And maybe that's exactly what Ken needed at that point in his life. Someone grounded, warm, and real. Insider reports often describe Tori as the kind of woman who could make a stranger feel like family in just one conversation. She had an open heart, a sharp sense of humor, and a gift for turning even the most ordinary day into something meaningful. From the beginning, Tori embraced Ken's life, not just the celebrity part, but the man himself as well. She supported his work on Gunsmoke, but never tried to insert herself into his public image. Their relationship was rooted in everyday things, from road trips to dinners at home and shared laughter that didn't require an audience. Although Ken and Tori never had biological children together, family life still played a large role in their home. Tori had 2 children from a previous marriage, and Ken stepped in as a father figure. He didn't treat them as just stepchildren. Instead, he loved them as his own. He was patient, present, and respectful, and taught by example more than by discipline. Even in his later years, Ken often referred to his family life with Tori as one of the greatest blessings of his life. After marrying Tori, Ken reportedly became more relaxed and more at ease. He had always been a hard-working and serious man, but Tori brought out his softer side. She encouraged him to slow down when needed, helped him stay connected to people outside the entertainment world, and created a sense of home that he had long been missing. He even credited her with keeping him grounded and emotionally balanced, especially after Gunsmoke ended and the limelight faded. He didn't struggle with the ego problems that plagued many of his peers, and many believed that Tori was a big reason why. They traveled together frequently, not for work, but just to enjoy life. Whether it was visiting old friends, going on fishing trips, or driving across the country to small towns and Western festivals, the couple cherished their time together. Ken was still recognized almost everywhere they went, but it was never about the attention. Tori didn't mind the fans. Instead, she welcomed them. She understood that Ken had given something meaningful to people through his work, and she supported it with quiet grace. Together, they lived a relatively quiet life in their later years, away from the chaos of Hollywood, and were together for over almost decades, a rare accomplishment in any world, but especially in the entertainment industry. And yet, as perfect as their love story might seem from the outside, not everything was smooth behind closed doors. As time went on, the couple faced their share of devastating challenges, from health issues to personal losses, and even public controversies that tested their resilience. And it's those quiet storms and outside tensions the fans never saw that would reveal the true depth of their bond, and, eventually, the heartbreaking turns that came later in life, when the spotlight got complicated. Ken Curtis was never known for chasing controversy. In fact, for most of his career, he deliberately avoided the noise that often surrounds Hollywood fame. But even for someone as grounded and private as Ken, a few moments in his life managed to stir attention, and not always for the right reasons. The most notable incident came in 1987, long after Gunsmoke had ended its legendary run. CBS had announced a reunion TV movie titled Gunsmoke: Return to Dodge, bringing back James Arness as Marshal Matt Dillon. Naturally, fans expected to see Ken Curtis return as Festus, the character he had played in over 300 episodes and who had become one of the most recognizable faces of the show. But when the special aired, Ken was nowhere to be seen, and fans immediately noticed this. His absence sparked speculation and disappointment. Was there a falling out? Had he retired from acting? Or was he too ill to return? The truth was far more ordinary and also very frustrating to many. Ken had been approached to reprise his role, but negotiations quickly broke down. According to multiple sources, he was offered what he considered a disrespectfully low salary, especially for a character so central to the show's legacy. And so, Ken refused the offer. To him, it wasn't about ego, but about fairness. After devoting over a decade of his life to Gunsmoke, he believed he deserved better than a pay cut for a one-time return. While some fans sympathized with him, others felt disappointed or even let down. The studio never addressed the issue publicly in detail, and Ken remained relatively quiet about it as well. Another odd rumor that followed Ken throughout his life involved the claim that he had a twin brother named Chester Curtis. Some fan forums and online biographies have floated the idea, usually pointing to vague eyewitness accounts or unverified sources. However, there are no verified records of Ken Curtis having a twin brother or even a sibling named Chester. In reality, Ken came from a modest-sized family, but unlike multiple rumors and speculation, there's no official documentation or family statements supporting the existence of a twin. But like many old Hollywood myths, this one seems to have grown more from fan imagination than fact. Perhaps the most unexpected chapter in Ken's public life involved his political views. While most actors from his era, especially those in the Western genre, avoided politics altogether, Ken quietly made his preferences known. He was a known supporter of Barry Goldwater during the 1964 presidential election, aligning himself with the Arizona senator's conservative ideals. Years later, in 1976, he also campaigned for Ronald Reagan, even making a few appearances at events. At the time, Reagan was still viewed more as an actor-turned-aspiring politician than a serious national leader. But Ken believed in his vision and didn't shy away from publicly backing him. This made him one of the few Western stars to take a public political stance, something that didn't sit well with all of his fans. Some admired his honesty, others felt politics had no place in entertainment. As for Tori, Ken's wife of over 3 decades, she lived largely out of the public eye and avoided controversy almost entirely. She wasn't one for interviews, didn't insert herself into industry conversations, and never used her husband's fame for personal gain. Her reputation remained consistent, warm, friendly, and respectful, both toward fans and the industry people who occasionally crossed their path. But just because their lives seemed calm on the surface didn't mean they were free of hardship. Fame fades, health changes, relationships evolve. And for Ken and Tori, the years that followed brought a different kind of challenge that no amount of television success or public admiration could prevent. Because when the camera lights dimmed and the scripts stopped coming, what remained was real life, and that's where the toughest battles would begin. Quiet battles behind the fame. Ken Curtis spent much of his life in front of the camera playing men who were strong, reliable, and often unshakable. But in real life, some of his greatest battles were the ones that no camera ever captured. While his career appeared smooth and successful from the outside, the truth was far more complex. Beneath the surface, Ken faced personal challenges that tested his health, his faith, and his sense of purpose. And through it all, his wife, Tori, remained by his side. Before he ever stepped onto a Hollywood set, Ken answered a much greater call. In 1943, during the height of World War II, Ken enlisted in the United States Army. He served with dedication until 1945, stationed primarily in the Pacific Theater. Like many young men of his generation, he didn't hesitate to put his personal ambitions on hold to serve his country. The experience shaped him, and although he rarely spoke about it publicly, some insider reports noted that he returned from the war more mature, grounded, and with a deeper appreciation for life. After the war, and after experiencing some level of national success, Ken faced something every entertainer fears: career instability. The late 1940s and early 50s were a volatile time in Hollywood. Musical westerns were losing popularity, and studios were beginning to shift their focus. Ken was forced to make a difficult pivot from music into acting, a gamble that could have gone either way. He took small roles, often in B-movies and television pilots, just to stay working. Nothing came easily, and it took years of persistence, connections, and luck to land the kinds of roles that eventually brought him back into the public eye. But even when success came, it never felt entirely secure. The entertainment industry is known for building stars up and then forgetting them just as quickly. Ken managed to keep working, thanks in large part to Gunsmoke, but the constant pressure to stay relevant never really disappeared. And after the show ended, he found himself once again facing the quiet uncertainty of life beyond the spotlight. But his greatest challenge was one that no amount of fame or experience could protect him from. In the late 1980s, Ken Curtis reportedly battled some health issues for several years, while trying to maintain some sense of normalcy. Through all of this, Tori remained the constant in his life. And while Ken's struggles took center stage, Tori faced challenges of her own, often quietly and without recognition. Tori carried the weight of living in the spotlight and watching the man she loved fade slowly. However, she still managed to provide warmth and kindness to those around them. In many ways, the final years of their lives brought them even closer. They spent more time together, talking about simpler times and revisiting memories from their early years of marriage. They leaned on family and especially on each other. Ken reportedly wasn't afraid of dying. However, some reports have noted that he did worry about Tori. He wanted her to be okay and to find peace after he was gone, because her strength was the reason he was able to keep going. Despite his personal struggles, Ken stayed mentally sharp for most of his final years. He continued to visit close friends and even attended small Western fan events when he was able. He wanted people to remember him as Festus, as the singer, the soldier, the storyteller, and, most of all, the man who tried to do things the right way, even when it was hard. The public didn't see much of Ken in his final years, and that's because he wanted privacy and dignity, not headlines or pity. And Tori honored that wish completely. Their quiet home became a place of reflection and gratitude, filled with photos from film sets, gifts from fans, letters from loved ones, and, most importantly, a sense of peace that came from a life fully lived. And as the final chapter of Ken Curtis's life approached, it became clear that even the toughest cowboy had his limits, but he faced them the same way he faced everything else, with quiet courage, humility, and a deep sense of love for the people who stood by him. What followed were his final months, and in those last moments, it wasn't the sound of applause or the glow of stage lights that surrounded Ken Curtis. It was something far more meaningful: the presence of the one person who never left his side. The final ride home. In the years following his long run on Gunsmoke, Ken Curtis gradually stepped away from the bright lights of mainstream television. He didn't vanish entirely, but the whirlwind pace of his earlier career gave way to something simpler and slower. He chose smaller projects, more meaningful roles, and, most importantly, more time with his wife, Tori, and their family. One of his final acting appearances came in 1983, when he took a recurring role in the short-lived NBC drama The Yellow Rose, a series centered on a modern Texas ranching family. Though the show didn't last long, Ken's presence on screen felt familiar and comforting, a reminder of the golden era of westerns that was quickly fading. His final film appearance came in 1991 in a television movie titled Conager, based on a Louis L'Amour story and starring Sam Elliott and Catherine Ross. Ken played an aging stagecoach driver, a small part, but one that felt right. There was no attempt to reinvent himself or chase after trends. He simply brought his quiet, authentic charm to the role, just as he always had. However, it would be his last time on camera. On April 28, 1991, Ken passed away in his sleep after suffering a heart attack at the age of 74. He was at home in Clovis, California, with Tori by his side. The news came as a shock to many, especially since he had appeared healthy to the public. There were no headlines or warnings leading up to his death. Instead, it was a peaceful end to a life lived on his own terms. He was cremated, and according to his wishes, his ashes were scattered across the flatlands of Colorado, near the same region where he had grown up. It was a fitting tribute. Ken had always carried the heart of the West with him. Not the Hollywood version, but the real one, which was tough, quiet, and deeply rooted in family and faith. In Clovis, the town he called home in his later years, a bronze statue of Festus Haggen now stands. Like the man himself, it's grounded, welcoming, and carved with care. It serves as a reminder not just of the character he played, but of the man who brought him to life. Despite decades of fame, Ken Curtis lived modestly, preferring quiet nights at home to big events or red carpets. He was generous with his time, especially when it came to causes he believed in. He often participated in charity events for veterans, made appearances at Western heritage festivals, and donated to historical preservation efforts. These weren't PR moves. Ken simply wanted to give back. For Tori, Ken's passing was the end of a partnership that had lasted 25 years. She had been his caregiver, his confidant, and his greatest source of comfort. Her final tears were quiet but deep. She didn't seek the spotlight or public sympathy. Instead, she continued to honor Ken's memory privately, surrounded by her children, grandchildren, and the friends they had made over the decades. In the years after his death, Tori kept the stories alive, not through public events or books, but in the way she carried herself and cared for others. She lived a quiet life in Clovis, often visiting places she and Ken had loved, and always speaking of him with warmth. When she passed away, her memory was closely tied to his, the two names always mentioned together. Tori Ahern Curtis passed away quietly on November 2, 1997, 6 years after Ken's death. She was 68 years old and was surrounded by her children, grandchildren, and a few close friends. Tori spent her final years in quiet reflection, and her death marked the end of a love story that, while touched by tragedy, was grounded in loyalty, resilience, and quiet devotion. Today, Ken Curtis is remembered not just as Festus Haggen or a Sons of the Pioneer singer, but as a man who lived fully, gave generously, and loved deeply. He stayed true to who he was, as the boy from a Colorado jailhouse who became one of the most beloved faces in American television. And while the era of westerns may have come and gone, Ken's legacy rides on, carried not by fame, but by the lasting impression of a man who brought heart, humor, and humanity to everything he touched. What's your favorite Ken Curtis movie? Drop your answers in the comment section below. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to click on the next video on your screen, like this video, and subscribe to our channel for more updates.